Yo everyone, welcome to 2026, and I thought that there'd be no better way to bring in the new year than to reveal the exact system that I've used to close $15,000 paid in full deals. For those of you who don't know me, I have 15 years worth of sales experience, 7 of those being the founding seller for 3 global SaaS startups opening up in Australia. It was in my SaaS sales career that I learned to sell strategic B2B deals. I then took that same skill set and applied it to my agency, which I started last year, and scaled it past $250,000 in revenue in the first year. So in today's video, I'll be revealing the exact system that I've used for over 8 years and can be applied to any industry or any niche. Make sure you watch to the end, hit me up in the comments if you have any questions, and I'll see you in a bit. Awesome, so this is the same framework that I've been using for well and truly over 8 years now, both throughout my SaaS B2B career when I was doing tech sales, and recently when I've moved into doing agency sales over the past year. So P.R.I.M.E is actually an acronym, and it's a list of questions that you need to be asking in sequential order. Okay, and I'm going to go really deep into this, but it begins with positioning the call. After we've positioned ourselves in the call, we then go to revealing the current state of the prospect. Once we've done that, we then identify the problems of that current state. We then measure the impact of those problems, and then we finally tie everything together by getting the prospect to envision both a utopian or positive and dystopian or negative future. So number one, with positioning the call, effectively what we're trying to do here is set expectations as to how the call is going to go. This is really important. The reason being, if you think about it from the prospect's perspective, many of you right now are just doing cold outreach, cold email, cold call, all that sort of thing in order to get the prospect on a demo call with you. Some of you are running paid ads as well. But if you think about it from the perspective of the prospect, either way, this prospect in most cases is going to be relatively cold. They're not going to know too much about your business. They wouldn't have done too much research either in terms of clients that you've worked with, looked at testimonials, things of this nature. So when we're positioning the call, what we're trying to do is set up ourselves as the authority figure. We're trying to let the prospect know that we have had calls like this in the past before, and this is typically how the call is going to go. You're communicating that you've already done this in the past before. This is effectively the agenda and the steps of how the call typically goes and what the outcome will be by the end of the call. This is a huge thing that I see a lot of sales reps don't do, is they will typically just jump straight into asking the prospects questions rather than trying to set up, I guess, the context or the agenda before actually jumping into those questions. But once you position the call, you can then move into the next step, which is revealing the current state. So what we want to do here when we're revealing the current state is ask questions about the prospect's current state of affairs or current situation. Asking questions about the current state or current situation is actually the easiest type of questions to ask, and I see way too many sales reps stuck on this part of the P.R.I.M.E framework, or at least of their discovery, for far too long. If you think about the types of questions that we're asking about the current state or current situation, it's things like, how are things done at the moment? What the goals are, how much money are they making, things of this nature. So very surface level, very easy to ask, but also not very deep. And really, you're not going to make the sale by asking too many of these current state questions. And again, when I've been going through the call reviews for a lot of the students that I work with or for other agency owners, a lot of them are staying on this part of the framework for far too long. Okay, they're doing the discovery for at least 15, 20 minutes, but they're just asking too many questions about the current situation. And when you're asking questions about the current situation, you're not actually helping the prospect understand the pain they're in and measuring the impact of any problems that they have, right? And that's really where the sale is made. So that then brings us to identifying the problems. Now, as you can see at the bottom of the slide, this is actually where the sale begins. All sales begin with problems. That's actually the reason why people buy. That's also the reason why businesses buy. They're not going to buy unless they actually have a problem that they're trying to solve. So this is where the majority of your discovery should be, is just identifying as many problems as possible. And again, as we progress through the slides, this is going to make a lot more sense. These types of questions are a lot harder to ask compared to current state questions. And again, this is why a lot of you are not doing it at the moment, simply because you don't know what questions to ask and you don't know how to weave those questions in properly to make them feel a little bit more natural. That will come with 2 things. Number 1 is planning, and number 2 is practice. But effectively what we're trying to do here is ask questions about what problems the current state is causing the prospect. So try to uncover as many problems as you possibly can, because this, again, helps us build the business case and it stretches the gap between where they are and where they want to be. Now, once we've done that, we then move into measuring the impact. Now, this is the most impactful, no pun intended, part of your discovery call. This is actually where the sale is made. If you saw on the previous slide, that's where the sale begins, with problems, but the actual sale is made with impact, right? Now, what I mean by this is after we know what problems problems are being caused within the prospect's business, we then need to start to measure the impact these problems are actually having on the business as well. So this can be done through quantification of time, money, or whatever else is relevant for your niche. But effectively, it's always going to come back to money. So in some cases, and I'm just going to give you an example right now, you might be speaking to a prospect where they're wasting a lot of time chasing leads, right? That might be the biggest problem that they're dealing with. The next thing we'd want to ask is, okay, how much time are you spending chasing these leads? They might say it's like 4 or 5 hours a day. And we then want to quantify that amount of time, right? So 4 or 5 hours a day, fair enough. How much do you charge per hour, or how much is your time worth? Something like that. They might say it's like $500 an hour. I'm just giving you a very high example here. But, you know, if it was $500 an hour a prospect's charging, and I've spoken to a prospect in the past, by the way, that's done this in the real estate niche, that's about $2,000 to $2,500 per day. And that's how we actually measure the impact that the problem's having, right? And hopefully that makes sense as to why this is where the sale is made. Because once we start understanding how much impact a certain problem is having, that's where we start to bring the problem and the pain to the forefront of the prospect's mind. Now, once we've done that, the next step of the framework is to help the prospect envision the future. And we always start with the positive future, because if you think about the mindset and kind of where the prospect is right now in terms of the discovery, we've taken them through a lot of negativity, for lack of a better term, right? We've asked them about their current state, and typically 9 times out of 10, the current state is not going to be good. Otherwise, why would they come to speak to you? We then try and ask them about as many problems as we possibly can. And we're also trying to measure and quantify the impact these problems are having on their business, right? So what we want to do at this point is we want to try and help them feel a little bit better from an emotional standpoint, okay? Because although we're selling a version of B2B sales where, of course, it's not as emotional, it's more logical, emotion is still involved here to some extent. And it's important that we do lean into that. So here, when we're getting the prospect to envision the positive future, we're trying to get them to do 2 things. So number one is we want them to tell us what an ideal service looks like from their point of view. So from a marketing lead generation standpoint, what specifically are you after? They're then going to tell you that they're after quick response times, they're after qualified leads. They'll talk about very tangible things in terms of what they're actually looking for a marketing service. So that's very good, because once we get this information from the prospect, we can then present those exact things to them during our presentation or during our demo. Okay, so effectively what we're trying to do at this point is get them to tell us exactly what they want, so we can then show them exactly what they want. Now, that's more on the logical side of things. On the emotional side of things, though, we're also going to then start asking them how things will look if they achieve their goal. Okay, so we want to ask them, what will business be like? What will your personal life be like? Will there be other things in terms of the business or your personal life that you'll be able to do that you haven't been able to do before? And then these types of things will really get the prospect to open up to you on more of a personable type level. Okay, so this is how consultative and B2B sales typically works. It's not exactly the same as if you were trying to sell some sort of coaching offer where the questions you're asking are very emotionally charged, and we're just trying to get emotion out of the prospect, right? Because many times business owners aren't just going to buy based on emotion. In fact, I would argue pretty much all the time they're not going to do that. So we need to get them to understand both the logical and the emotional side of the future, what both of those things look like. And the final thing that we're going to do here is get them to envision a negative future. So this is also known as cost of inaction. Effectively, this is getting the prospect to think about what will actually happen if they don't change and if they keep going the way that they are. So again, from an emotional standpoint, we've just got them to envision a positive future. So they're thinking about positive things, they're feeling all warm and fuzzy on the inside. But what we're now doing is we're actually pulling the rug under their feet, okay? And we're kind of showing them a mirror in terms of their current situation. Like right now, they're not in a great state. They're feeling a lot of pain, a lot of problems, and those problems are having a big impact on their business, right? So I think it's a very fair question to ask. If you keep going the way you are, what's going to happen? And we actually need them to tell you straight out that if they keep going the way they are, things are either going to stay the same, if not get worse. We then tie everything up by asking the question, well, what do you feel like you need to do to put yourself in the best possible position to achieve your goals? And then once the prospect tells you that they need your solution or a solution very similar, that's then your green light to move into the pitch. So this is a step-by-step visual of how I typically like to run the P.R.I.M.E framework. Okay, so as you can see here, we're positioning the call. That's something that we only have to do one time. We then go to revealing the current state. identifying problems, and measuring the impact of those problems. Now, as you can see here, what we're doing is we're effectively going around in circles as many times as we need to, okay? And the reason being, if you think about how a typical conversation works with a friend, questions go off in all sorts of different directions, okay? And this is why I'm a big fan of frameworks rather than scripts, because if you go by a script and the prospect tells you something that's off script, then you're going to be completely fucked. You're not going to know what to say. You're going to get confused, and it's very obvious when a lot of you are just reading off a script because you're not looking directly into the camera, right? And I can tell this maybe because I've been doing sales for so many years now, and in many cases, I would assume the prospect can tell as well, because not only does it look like you're looking away from your screen, but you also sound very robotic. So this is why a framework is so much more important. So effectively what we're doing is we're asking questions, as many as we can, to reveal the current state, as long as it's relevant. We're then identifying as many problems as we can, but every time we reveal a new problem or identify a new problem, we then need to measure the impact of that problem straight away. And that's why we just go around in circles as many times as we need to. There's no real set number as to how many times you need to go through this process. Really, it's going to be as many times as you feel like you need to until you're satisfied with the problems that the prospect is facing, with the impact that those problems are having on their current state and their current situation in their business. And that's then your green light to transition into getting them to envision both the positive and negative future. So I'm going to go through two examples right now in terms of what this could look like. Now, the first example is a very unrealistic example, but this is more conceptually just to give you an idea of how things could look. First question we ask is, what brings you here today? So that's got an R next to it, meaning that it's a current state question where we reveal the current state. Prospect says, I need more leads. You then say, what's been your biggest challenge getting leads? So you move straight into identifying problems, okay? When we start talking about problems or challenges, things of this nature, that's effectively a problem-based question. Prospect then says, I only get a few a month. You then say, got it, how much is this costing you in potential revenue, not having enough leads, which is then measuring the impact, right? Because we're asking, how much is this costing you in potential lost revenue? That's a tangible, quantifiable number in lost revenue. Again, not having enough of these leads, right? Prospect then says $20,000 per month. We can then extrapolate that out. So $20,000 over the course of the year is $240,000. Very close to $250,000 right there. So if we look at this, the prospect comes in saying that they need more leads, but by following the P.R.I.M.E framework and by asking the right questions, we then turn a problem of just quote unquote needing more leads into a problem that's now actually costing the prospect nearly $250,000 per year. So that's why and how the sale is made. The prospect is not coming to you simply because they need more leads. The prospect is coming to you because this lead problem that they currently have is costing them $250,000 per year. And if they don't sort this out, it's only either going to stay the same or get worse. Now, this is a second example, which is a little bit more realistic. And this goes in that loop that I was showing you before, okay, in the previous slide. So again, you ask what brings you here today, revealing the current state. Prospect says, I need more leads. You say, what are you currently doing to get more leads? Okay, so rather than moving straight into pain or identifying pain, we're then going to ask them another question, which is revealing the current state, because we want to know specifically what they're doing right now to get more leads so we can build pain out of that, right? They say that they're just relying on referrals and door knocks. And then again, before we move to pain, we're still revealing more of the current state. So we say, how many leads do you get per week doing that, right? Doing your current thing. They say 2 per week. So now I'm satisfied with the current state as far as right now is concerned. So then I can now move into identifying problems. So what problems is this causing the business only having 2 per week? The prospect says we're not able to pay the bills and we're running in a deficit. I can now move into measuring the impact of that problem because he's just told me that they're not able to pay the bills and that they're running into a deficit. Those are 2 key things. So we then say, how much of a deficit are you in? Again, when we're asking questions like how much time or money does something cost, that is measuring the impact of the problem. He then says $30,000 per month. And if we extrapolate that out over the year, that's $360K, but we're not going to stop there, okay? We're now going to loop back around and ask another current state question so we can take the prospect through this pain cycle once again. So we ask, what was your revenue prior to this problem? And we go back to the top and we just repeat the cycle as many times as we possibly need to. So I'm going to leave you with one final note, and I want you to take a screenshot of this, write it down, print it out, stick it somewhere where you'll see it every day. I don't care. But just always keep in mind, problems plus impact equal pain. Pain is where the sale is made. People buy because of pain, and what we're trying to do with discovery, particularly in B2B sales, but it's also relevant to B2C, okay? It doesn't matter what you're selling or who you're selling to. People will always buy because of pain, specifically business owners in terms of agency, what we're doing right now. So always keep that in mind. Problems plus impact equal pain, and that's why identifying problems and measuring impact are so important. So that's everything for today, team. That's the exact system that I've used over the past 8 years to close millions of dollars in revenue. Be sure to click below to follow me on Instagram and join my free Discord community. I'm really active in there. And I'm also doing free call breakdowns for any agency owners, no strings attached. So if you're interested in that, hit me up and let's get it done. I'll speak to you soon.